everybody, welcome back to English 112. This is for our very last class before our final examination. And this is for Thursday, the 14th, where we are putting closure to our poetry section, where we are talking about The Lover Not Taken, Coca-Cola and Coco Frio, and also The Hill We Climb. And if you look at the dates below, you'll see that on Thursday, the 14th, which is perhaps when you are watching this video, this is when paper number 2 is due. I will take paper number 2 up until the final examination, but not past that time. The final exam being the 18th, which is a Monday. I will post the examination at 8:30 a.m. and you will have 24 hours in which to take that examination so that it is due on the 19th. Tuesday at 8:30 a.m. 24 hours later. If you were taking this exam in a face-to-face situation, you'd have 2 hours. I certainly don't expect you to spend 24 hours working on the examination. Basically, I wanted you to spend approximately 2 hours or so, where I will give you a series of essay prompts, and you get to choose within those particular prompts. The bulk will be devoted to poetry, 80 points, because you haven't had an opportunity to write a paper on poetry. But you'll also have some essay prompts on short story and drama. And the idea of this open book, open notes examination is that you can synthesize some of the main points that we've been talking about over the course of the semester. I'm not expecting anything as neat or as polished or as well developed as what you would be doing, let's say, in a paper. But you still should be able to have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. So, in terms of the first poem, The Lover Not Taken, I hope it sounds familiar to you, that title, because we did a similar poem earlier, The Road Not Taken. And you could certainly appreciate The Lover Not Taken as an independent poem and not realize that it was based on The Lover Not Taken, or The Road Not Taken. But The Lover Not Taken has so much more depth to it when you understand that it is a parody of The Road Not Taken. A parody is something that exaggerates the original for humorous effect. If you're familiar with Saturday Night Live, then you probably have some understanding of parody. The Lover Not Taken was written in 1984, very different time period. I actually was a teenager in the 1980s. I can tell you that we were known as the decade of greed, the idea that one could have everything if one wanted to. And very different message than Frost, The Road Not Taken, that one choice precludes another. The Lover Not Taken was also written by a female, and that puts a different twist on this particular poem. And what we have is a woman who's contemplating two lovers. Unlike the Frost poem that doesn't supply us with a specific choice so that we can plug in the choice, we're given a specific choice. And in reading this poem, committed to one, she wanted both. Mulling it over, long she stood, alone on the road. Loath to leave, wanting to hide in the undergrowth. This new guy, smooth as a yellow wood, really turned her on. She liked his hair, his smile. But the other, Jack, had a claim on her already, and she had to admit he did wear well. In fact, to be perfectly fair, he understood her. His long, lithe frame beside hers in the evening tenderly lay. Still, this blonde guy dropped by someday. Couldn't Way just lead on to Way? No, for if Way led on and Jack found out, she doubted if he would ever come back. Oh, she turned with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence she might be telling this. And I, she would say, stood faithfully by. But by then, who would know the difference? With that in mind, she took the fast way home, the road by the pond, and phoned the blonde. And I don't know if you noticed that very last stanza is much shorter than the others. It just moves much more quickly to illustrate the idea of the fast way. And there's enough language from The Road Not Taken so we could recognize the original. And as she's mulling over her two choices, there's a reference to yellow wood, which is language from Frost's poem, but do know that wood is oftentimes used as a slang term for erection. And then she talked about the blonde guy, who isn't given a name because she doesn't have a committed relationship with him, unlike Jack, who is given a name. But the blonde guy, he really turned her on. She liked his hair, his smile. But the other Jack had a claim on her already, and he did wear well. And she talked about what she could risk losing if Jack ever found out if she did pursue this affair. And that she turns with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence, and I, she would say, stood faithfully by. But by then, who would know the difference? The idea that this seems to be such a monumental choice, and certainly it is for an individual, but in the overall scheme of the universe, perhaps it's not nearly as important. And then, of course, she took the fast way home, the road by the pond, and phoned the blonde. And the fast way suggests the easy way, but one could argue as to what exactly is the easy way. Is the easy way pursuing the second relationship, or is the easy way not pursuing the second relationship? And I guess it's a question of whether or not it's easier to defy societal standards or to adhere to societal standards. And how might this poem be different if it was the experience of a male contemplating two lovers as opposed to a female contemplating two lovers? Just some things to think about. The ambiguity, of course, is one of the great hallmarks of literature, and that you can have multiplicity of meaning. And even in the title, The Lover Not Taken, we're not exactly sure what ultimately her decision is. So I like the idea of just a parody where you could have a little bit of fun with an original. It's one of the reasons why I assigned that poem, especially after we did The Road Not Taken. The second poem, Coca-Cola and Coco Frio. This was written by Martin Espada, and he has a very interesting history. He basically is a lawyer by trade, was writing in his spare time, became such a prolific and popular writer that he completely changed around and became a writer full-time, and he works as an English professor at UMass Amherst, and then he practices law part-time. And Martin Espada oftentimes writes autobiographical poems that can also be symbolic. Martin Espada being from Puerto Rico, or being Puerto Rican, and living or being raised in New York City, much like I was. And that said, he oftentimes talks about the tensions of assimilation and cultural heritage. And he's very clear that in Coca-Cola Coco Frio, he's referencing himself and an experience that he had. But it also is a great commentary on the status of Puerto Rico, which is sort of an in-between status because it is a territory, which means that it is not an official state of the United States. So Puerto Rico doesn't have, let's say, the same voting rights, for instance. But Puerto Ricans are American citizens. And there are also differences with taxes. It's one of the reasons why big corporations like to have business in Puerto Rico, because they don't necessarily have to pay as much in taxes. Lots of controversy as to what the status of Puerto Rico should be. Should it remain as it is, as a territory? Should it become an independent entity from the United States, or should it become a full-fledged state? And I think all of that is embedded within Martin Espada's poem about Puerto Rico, which in Spanish means Puerto Rico, or rich port. And Puerto Rico is an island in the Caribbean. And when Martin Espada talks about New York, it's easy to forget that, or it's easier to ultimately lose the idea that so is New York. It is an island. A different kind of island, obviously, than a Caribbean island, but an island nonetheless. Puerto Rico, their primary language being Spanish, secondarily English. They have their own culture, but yet they also have been very much Americanized. This particular poem is not included in the textbook. It is included in what I call handout, and I had on our outline, I also provided the link to this poem, which I will read to you. I had the great pleasure of listening a couple of times to Martina Spada read his poetry, once years ago and once recently, both at GCC and also at the Lava Center, which is an art center in downtown Greenfield. He has a very lyrical sense, the way he performs his poetry. It's very much an event, almost like seeing a dramatic performance. On his first visit to Puerto Rico, the island of family folklore, the fat boy wandered from table to table with his mouth open. At every table, some great aunt would steer him with cool, spotted hands to a glass of Coca-Cola. One even sang to him in all the English she could remember, a Coca-Cola jingle from the 40s. He drank obediently, though he was bored with this potion, familiar from soda fountains in Brooklyn. Then, at a roadside stand off the beach, the fat boy opened his mouth to coco frio, a coconut chilled, then scalped by a machete so that a straw could inhale the clear milk. The boy tilted the green shell overhead and drooled coconut milk down his chin. And suddenly Puerto Rico was not Coca-Cola or Brooklyn, and neither was he. For years afterward, the boy marveled at an island where the people drank Coca-Cola and sang jingles from World War II in a language they did not speak, while so many coconuts in the trees sagged heavy with milk, swollen and unsuckled. So this poem from 1993 contrasts two polar opposites. Coca-Cola, which is very much a symbol of America. It very much is a symbol of corporate industrialization. It very much is a symbol of that which is unhealthy. It's basically sugar water. And coco frio, which is defined for us in the poem, that it happens to be coconut milk that comes from a coconut that's scalped by a machete, a green coconut. So this is as fresh and as local as you're going to get. It's from a roadside stand. It's as healthy as you're going to get. And it's as, culturally true as you're going to get in Puerto Rico. And that in his first visit to Puerto Rico, which means rich port, by the way, Puerto Rico, the island of family folklore, because he grew up in New York, so he really doesn't know much about Puerto Rico. He's going as if he were a tourist. The fat boy wandered from table to table, and he admits he was the fat boy, literally. But the fat boy also represents America itself, that is fat with its abundance. And of course, drinking too much Coca-Cola will lead you to become fat as well. The fat boy wandered from table to table with his mouth open. In other words, he's thirsty for something. Of course, what he's thirsty for is his culture. And at every table, some great aunt steered him with cool, spotted hands. If the hands are spotted, we're talking about the older generation. To a glass of Coca-Cola. And of course, they want to provide him with American assimilation, but he wants to experience his true culture. One even saying to him in all the English he could remember, because after all, Spanish would have been the primary language, especially from someone of the generation that would have cool spotted hands in 1993. A Coca-Cola jingle from the 40s. So basically being so assimilated that you can sing the songs and not even know what they mean or be able to speak the language. It goes to show the power of American advertising as well. Coca-Cola perhaps being the most recognizable advertising symbol globally that exists. He drank obediently, though he's bored with this potion. I love the idea of potion, the idea that it's magical, that it's something that perhaps can manipulate. Didn't we talk about something like this with Shakespeare when we talked about A Midsummer Night's Dream? And soda fountains in Brooklyn. Soda fountains were oftentimes in pharmacies, actually. If you know Baker's and Shelburne Falls, then you know about a soda fountain where you could get things like milkshakes and so forth. Then at a roadside stand off the beach, again, as locals you're going to get, the fat boy opened his mouth to coco frio, and it's defined for us, a coconut chilled and scalped by a machete so that a straw could inhale the clear milk. And this reference to milk is supposed to bring forth images of a baby drinking milk and this fat boy looking for nourishment, looking for his motherland. You are supposed to think of terms of mother. The boy tilted the green shell. In fact, this is so fresh that it's green. Overhead and drooled coconut milk down his chin, almost the way a baby does when it's suckling. And Puerto Rico wasn't Coca-Cola or Brooklyn, neither was he. And he marvels at an island where people drink Coca-Cola, in other words, become so Americanized that they sing jingles from World War II in a language they don't speak. While so many coconuts in the trees sag heavy with milk, swollen and unsuckled. And you should think of images such as breasts, for instance, and again, the idea of suckling from one's mother and being thirsty and needing nourishment, because all of those ideas are embedded within the poem. Now, the last poem, The Hill We Climb, I had the pleasure of first experiencing it, as many people did, by watching Amanda Gorman, the author, recite it during the last presidential inauguration, which was most certainly a tense time. There were grave questions about whether or not we would have a peaceful transfer of power, something that had just automatically been assumed prior to that inauguration. You remember the insurrection of January 6th had occurred just days earlier on Capitol Hill. When Amanda Gorman talks about the hill we climb, she's not just talking about a metaphorical hill, she's also talking about Capitol Hill. And it was only after the fact, when she delivered her poem, that the text was released. And if you read the text, and I've included the link, you will see just how brilliant the poem is. But just hearing the poem once, I knew it was brilliant. And I remember after hearing it, I went to my social media account and posted, I've just seen the future of poetry, and her name is Amanda Gorman. It truly was something. And for this particular poem, if you look in the notes below, I've got the video from when she presented at the inauguration. And even just listening to it, you get the sense of her incredible use of language, how she was able to use rhyme, how she was able to use alliteration, the initial repetition of consonant sounds, how she was able to use symbolism in order to inspire, as she's there in her bright yellow coat, again, trying to look to the future and optimism. And underneath that yellow coat, she's wearing a bulletproof vest, as is everyone on the stage or anyone near the stage, because, again, it was uncertain that there would be a peaceful transfer of power. And much can be said about this particular poem. What's perhaps most incredible is that Amanda Gorman was only 21 years old when she gave this poem. She's the youngest individual to read a poem at a presidential inauguration. And sometimes poetry, I think, just needs to be experienced. Perhaps it's best not to analyze it too much. So I'm going to leave you with just listening to her. And again, you can find the link below. And thinking about some of her statements as we near another inauguration. It's hard to believe, but 3 years have elapsed. So in another year or so, we will have yet another inauguration. So I leave you with Amanda Gorman and also a farewell message. So if you look in the notes below, there is a brief farewell message. And also what you will see is our attendance question, our last attendance question for today. And that just happens to be a way to put some closure onto the semester, where I'm going to ask you to identify one of the 3 poems that you wanted to talk about and indicate what you think its main message is and why. So it's up to you to choose. And again, you know, you're not required to respond to your classmates, but you are required to read their responses, my responses in turn. And I will be catching up on the discussion forum questions about poetry this weekend, so that you've got that information for your final examination if you so wanted to utilize it, because ultimately it's open book, open notes. So with that said, I leave you with Amanda Gorman. I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. And next class, I will be posting the final examination. Take care. Bye-bye.